Thank you, sir. And I left my book at home. Proverbs 6. And I believe we were in section 16 through 18. Is that right? Because I left mine at home. That's why I remember the mark. Okay. All right. So we're talking about these 6 things the Lord hates. Yea, 7 are an abomination to the Lord. We talked about a proud look, right? What that is. A reflection upon yourself in a proud way, right? And so that's something that can imply there. Next one, a lying tongue. What's a lying tongue? What would be another way of saying this a little less poetic? A liar, right? And so you go through this. And so it says, these 6 things the Lord hates, yes, even what? 7. And we talked a little bit about the word abomination, right? You think about that thing that you forgot about in the back of the refrigerator, and you find several months later, and you open it up, say, I don't remember what this is. And then you see it, and you have close it quickly while you're remembering what it used to be. That's an illustration of an abomination, right? Something that is repulsive, disgusting, something that we avoid, that we're going to want to rid out of our lives. The problem is, a lot of things that are an abomination to the Lord, then people tend to be drawn to, because as we go on, we're going to see in the next couple chapters some of the things, the enticements, and we've talked about that already in these sections, but how many people are enticed to things they ought not to be? Yeah. Because we develop a tolerance for it, right? A tolerance for it. So we keep going, we talk about these things, a lying tongue or a liar. We're talking about being deceptive, right? Have you ever told something that you found out later to be wrong? Does that bother you? It bothers me, right? You say, to the best of my knowledge, I believe this is what it is, and then you find out later, guess what? You're wrong. As we look at these things, as we talk about wisdom, again, going back to what? The intent of the heart, right? And so this is someone who does this on purpose. That's their goal, is to deceive people. All right, any questions, comments about this one?
Well, I think there's more things that the Lord needs, but He was just giving us enough to give us the idea of what an evil person is like.
When you look at this list as we're going through this, oftentimes we don't see one without a glimpse of another, right? It's just, and so if we were giving a description to somebody of someone to look out for, right? As far as, hey, so-and-so's going to be coming by, here's a description of maybe what they look like, what they may be wearing. And so this is what we see is what God's describing, as Kathy said, this is not an exhaustive list, right? But what God is doing is He's drawing a picture of an unrighteous person by describing their ways. And so Kathy brings up a good point.
And almost everything that you could think of would somehow fit in that category.
Oh, yeah.
Like someone that steals, a heart that devises wicked plans.
Mm-hmm.
You could almost think about any sin that, and it would almost fit in every one of these categories somehow.
And that's why I left this blank, because I didn't know where to start and stop, you know. And we've discussed as much as we want, but like Tara said, you know, where would this list end? Where would it end?
Like you've always said that the word 7 means complete.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's why I think it's, you know.
Well, what I started to do is started to put main points and then put all these sub-points underneath of them. And what Tara just say? Where does it end, right? And we've got so many things. And, you know, we look at the opposite side of things. You know, when we look at what's the greatest command, what's the greatest command? Well, we're talking about love the Lord thy God with all thy what? Yeah. And so with our entire being, we love God. Now, as a result of that, right? Name all the things. You think about this. What do good parents do for their kids? It's a long list, isn't it? But if we say good parents love their children, what are they going to do for their children? They're going to care for them, provide for them, discipline them, train them. You got this long list again, right? And so we think about how many scriptures can we sit down, and sometimes I do this, and I'm sure you do too. We sit down and maybe take a blank piece of paper and write, the word or the theme, and start writing, just scribble all around it, right? About all the things that relate back to this command or warning, right? And I think we could do the same thing with this list here. And so we're talking about a deceptive person. And so we go back, a prideful person, right? Does pride come in a lot of different forms? Yeah. So does deception. A person who is a deceiver, right?
Every time the Bible talks about pride, it's never in a good
way. Yeah.
that I know of.
Mm-hmm. We use proud. How many of you are proud of your children? What? Kathy said maybe. No, but the thing is we're talking about, oftentimes when we use it today in our culture, some people do have prideful thoughts, right? But a lot of times the way we use it in our language today, we're not talking about the same proud, right? We say we're proud of our children, right? What if we said we are blessed by our children, right? By who they are and what they become. That's the same way of saying it, right? But some people, and that's something that we need to decide for ourselves, whether we want to take the word pride out of our vocabulary. And some people do, and I understand why, because we don't want to be getting it confused with a prideful person.
Proverbs 11:2 says, when pride comes, then comes shame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pride comes before a. Okay, so we're understanding these things. All right, we'll go back. We see a lying tongue, and then we have here hands that shed innocent blood. What are hands that shed innocent blood? Okay. And here I had all these handwritten notes in my book for this. So go Genesis 4. I think I've got them all. That's what I'm trying to. In Genesis 4, we have here the first example of someone who sheds innocent blood. And if you go to verse 9, it says, then the Lord said to Cain, where is Abel, your brother? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And so we have a question here posed by the guilty party. And he asks the question, am I my brother's keeper? What's the answer to this? It's a rhetorical question, but what's the answer? And the way I'm asking is rhetorical, right? But he's asking God, am I my brother's keeper? What's the right answer?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, you are. And so when you look at this and you look at the attitude of Cain, we understand that Cain had the wrong attitude, right? We talk about brothers and sisters. I've got some other scriptures to share as we go on through Proverbs. We talk about brothers and sisters. When we use that terminology, what are we describing? Family, right? Talking about a relationship, a camaraderie, an association with, a care for, right? And so when you think about that, God asked the question, where is Abel, your brother? And he said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, what have you done? Here, Cain's trying to skirt the issue. Does God know what has happened? Yeah. Just like, and we've used this illustration in other studies, when a parent goes to a child knowing what the child has done, what do they say? They ask the child to come clean, don't we? That's what God's doing. What's the difference between the statement of Abel and a penitent heart? He wasn't sorry for what he did, right? Am I my brother's keeper? Why asking me? Go figure it out for yourself. When Nathan came to David, we see a different attitude of David, don't we? This is one without penitence. We keep going. And he said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." You think about that. Your brother's blood is doing what? And what are we looking at? God, an abomination to God is one who does what? Okay, and we have to understand this properly. Keep this thought here while you're Genesis 4. Go to Exodus 20. And here, don't necessarily want to call this a mistranslation, but in Exodus 20 we have the Ten Commandments given, right? And just like what we're studying in Proverbs 6, this isn't an all-inclusive law of the Israelites, but we understand this is really the tenets of their faith in a lot of ways. And so when you come down and you look at verse 13, now a lot of us have switched to the New King James, but in a lot of the versions that maybe we were raised reading, it says, "Thou shalt not" what? Even carved in the courthouse wall, thou shalt not, thou shalt not kill. Now, what is killing? To bring death upon, really. That's what we're talking about, to bring death upon. We hauled some cattle in, and we're talking about one of two words, either murder or kill. They were what? Kill, right? Okay, their life was taken from them. It's not, that's exactly right. It's
What he's saying is whenever I ran over all the cats and dogs, like I did.
If it wasn't on purpose, right? Yeah, if it wasn't on purpose. Intent, okay? We're talking about hating somebody. The idea of hating, biblical hatred, is to wish they were dead. Cain hated his brother. And what was the result? Yeah, the action followed because we had a condition of the heart. Okay? And so here in Exodus 20, we have to understand, and I appreciate the New King James for this fact because it translated properly, "Thou shalt not murder." And what Cain did was he didn't kill his brother, he murdered his brother. And God says that his blood cries to me from the ground. Why? Because he was murdered? Because it was an abomination, right? Both of those are accurate answers. So we come to Genesis chapter 9. And here, in Genesis chapter 9, we have Noah after the flood. And Noah's given commands by God or from God. And there's some things that changed. And so we'll kind of read those while we're here. And so when you go back to Genesis 9:1, so God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth." And that's interesting when you think about that command. It's kind of a side note. God says, "Fill the earth." We ask the question, what's capacity? You know, if we had fire code, we'd have to have, if we had a county or if we had fire code for Eagleville, on the back we'd have to have a max, right? Seating capacity, occupancy, those sorts of things, right? And so God tells Noah and his sons to multiply and fill the earth. Is that something that we can ever do? Think about that. Can we overpopulate the earth? There's a lot of people that teach in our society that we can be overpopulated. And so God will provide for the population that's here. We don't have to worry about that. And I'm not saying that all of us need to have 15 children. But what I'm saying is, from a biblical standpoint, we don't have to be concerned about that, overpopulating the earth. So in verse 2 it says, "The fear of you," and who's he talking to? Noah and his sons. He's talking to mankind. God says to them, "The fear of you and the dread of you shall be on every beast of the earth, on every bird of the air, and all that move on the earth, and on all the fish of the sea. they are given into your hand. You have authority over them, but now we see that God has put into them instinctually the idea of fear. You go out in the wild, what do you have to do to capture something? Yeah, you have to capture it, right? To hunt it down. Verse 3, it says, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. This is a new command, and I know this doesn't have to do directly what we're talking about, the abomination of shedding innocent blood. But what we're understanding is, when we go to the meat case at Hy-Vee, there's no sin that took place, right? To get that in that freezer, right? And so here, he says, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. Now I'm going to tell you, there's some things I'm going to choose not to eat. How about you? But God says, every living thing that we have. Then he says, I have given you all things, even as the green herbs. What's that telling us? Before the flood, what did humans eat? Yeah. What's that? Vegetables. Poor Leaf and Dad, they wouldn't have survived. But anyway, yeah, vegetables. They didn't eat meat until after the flood, is what this is an indication of. So then we keep going, and we see this, that he says, but you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is its what? Blood. Life. You know, Daryl could probably tell us a lot more about blood than I know, but he's our paramedic. But how important is blood? Daryl's not going to speak. It's life, right? You don't have it, you're not going to survive, right? And so when you think about that, the importance of it, here, as we go back and think about what's being said by God with Cain, and Abel's missing, and God says his blood, his life, right, is crying from the ground. Blood, hands that shed innocent blood. So then he tells us this. He says, surely, verse 5, for your lifeblood I will demand a reckoning. From the hand of every beast I will require it, and from the hand of a man. You know, you watch these shows about game wardens, and when a bear eats somebody, what do they normally do? What's the procedure? Yeah. Why? If I understand properly, they say once that bear develops a taste and overcomes the fear of attacking a human, are they going to do it again? Yeah, do it again. And so God said to Noah, right, said what? Surely for your lifeblood I will demand a reckoning, from the hand of every beast I will require, and from the hand of man, from the hand of every man's brother I will require the life of man, right? And so when we watch the news and some dog has attacked a child, maimed them or killed them, and we see people petitioning to save the dog, well, we understand. What's more important? Man's blood, because that's what was crying from the ground in Genesis 4, right? Not those beef that we took to the slaughter, right? So then we go on in verse 6, it says, whoever sheds man's blood by man. All right, whoever sheds man's blood. Let's put a title on that person that sheds man's blood. Murderer. Yeah, murderer, right? Whoever is a murderer, right? It says, that's who we're talking about, the murderer. If your Bible's laid out like mine, the first line is talking about the murderer. It says, by man. Who's that mean? Everyone else, right? Who's not the murderer, okay? He says, by man his blood shall be shed. We're not talking about vigilante justice here. What's vigilante justice? Yeah, where you go after somebody and you take their life. Say, they upset me, they did something to me, they took someone else's life. Okay? That's not what, and I want to really step away and keep studying Proverbs, but I think this is an important concept for us to understand in today's society. He says, by man his blood shall be shed. If we could get a word or two words to describe the second line, what would be a proper definition? You're going to die too? Yeah. I was thinking, like Tara said, capital punishment.
So what about these people that claim that they weren't mentally whatever?
That sounds like a smart idea, doesn't it?
You know what I mean though? Like they're technically murderers.
I'm not here to discuss someone's mental sanity.
Yeah.
Because, and again, I wasn't prepared to look up. I just had these verses in mind. If we were to go to God's Old Testament law and teach when he set up his government and his punishments, God doesn't say, well, we're going to do a psychological evaluation. Because do we do that on a bear? Why? Because we just said it a few moments ago. Margie said it, once they taste it, once they overcome the fear, what is statistically going to happen?
Humans can be the same way. I feel like once they do it once.
And like I say, I'm not here to discuss that, but the fact of the matter is God doesn't address this here or anywhere else in the Bible. And I think that's an interesting study that I'd happy to study it with you, study it on your own. But the fact of the matter is, when someone gets to that point in life, in their mind, because where's that start? We're talking about the heart or the mind. When we get to that point, there's a lot of things, and we could talk maybe about trauma, but it doesn't matter, because once their mind allows them to lead them to that point, what would stop them from doing it again? We talk about gateways, right? There's a lot of different gateways. A gateway is what? Once we go through that, it opens up, okay? And the thing is God said, by man his blood shall be shed. Now, he's talking to Noah. He's talking about 8 people. And he's telling 8 people that if one of you in your group becomes a murderer, what's the responsible thing as society to do? I don't know if we oftentimes look at it as this is God's instruction to society. And I'm not trying to, start a riot or petition, but the fact of the matter is God created mankind and he knows how mankind is, right? Who's the ultimate judge? You say, well, yeah, but society put that person to death, right? If society messes up and puts the wrong person to death, is God going to say, well, sorry, bud, society voted against you and they were wrong, but I'm going to side with society? They put Christ to death. That's a great. The idea is what? We understand that with capital punishment, there has to be cases where there's an error made, right? In our system, under the Old Testament law, there had to be what? 2 or 3 witnesses. You think about that. Are we starting to take the question out of it? Okay. Then he tells us this, for in the image of God he made man. We go back to Genesis 1, 26 and 27. We're made in God's image, right? If we're willing to destroy something that was made in God's image, what's that tell us about our heart? And again, we are not talking about killing. We're talking about murder. Because murder, we've heard it, we talk about premeditated what? Yeah. They were killed premeditatedly. I can't get it out right. Anyway, talking about they premeditated. They thought about it ahead of time and then killed them. If we go back and really think about Cain and Abel, what happened in that event? Cain was angry with his brother because he was embarrassed because his brother did the right thing and Cain did the wrong thing. So he said, well, instead of me fixing my life, I'll just get rid of the person who made me look bad. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to spend that much time on it. And if we have more questions, we can go further into that. But I think it's important for us to understand. We could go Romans and look at more, talking about the government shall not bear the sword in vain, right? There has to be a process. It's not my choice to go out and execute and practice capital punishment. There's a process. We can study that out more. But the fact of the matter is that is a system that's approved of by God. Not only approved of by God, but we have instituted by God. It's created by God. It was designed by God from the beginning. All right, any questions or comments? That's kind of a touchy subject, isn't it? Okay, we'll go back. So we understand, talking about hands that shed innocent blood. And the reason we're able to look at these things in the Old Testament, we don't have to always go to the New Testament, which we could go to keep studying examples in the New Testament regarding lying and murder, these sorts of things. Because this list we're talking about is a list of moral crimes, right? Moral crime. From the beginning to the end of time, God holds us responsible morally the same way. So we go back, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans. And so Tara mentioned this a few minutes ago, is a heart that devises wicked plans. We just got off the topic of talking about hatred, right, from our heart or our minds that leads us to murder, talking about things that are premeditated. Now we get the next thing we were talking about is someone who does what? Plans wickedness, right? Now, how many of us have sinned? We all have. Romans 3:23 tells us all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. How many times have we looked back and said, oops, I sinned? Yeah, we say, oops, I shouldn't have done that. And so we look back. But here, we're looking forward to, I'm going to what? Sin. And so we could go to, I'd plan on going to Genesis 6, talking about the thoughts and intents of man's heart was on evil continually. That was the condition of the earth during the flood, or prior to the flood. And so when we're talking about those who plan wickedness. All right, any comments on that? I think we understand what that is. Here we have feet that are swift in running to evil. What are they looking for? Next bad thing we can do to take part in, to participate in. You know, like we talked about, or just mentioned a moment ago, you know, if we're trying to do, if we're striving to live the life that we ought to live, if we do what we're supposed to do, we won't sin. But when we fall, we stumble, we have shortcomings, and we sin, and we look back and say, okay, I've got to not do that again. I've got to watch how I got into that so I don't get into that situation again, right? To avoid that, to become stronger. And so this is, well, they just excited, look forward to sinning. And I believe that I have met people like this. I've known people that they didn't care, they just wanted to sin. It says a false witness who speaks lies. This is similar to a lying tongue, right? There's some people that just lie. But what are they doing in verse 19? What's the difference in who it affects directly? Okay. In legal affairs, a false witness who speaks lies. And so we're talking about someone that just doesn't stop at telling lies in general, but we're going to involve other people's lives in this, right? Innocent party. Here a moment ago we asked a question about capital punishment. In order to be put to death, what did you have to have? Witnesses. When Christ was put to death, what did they have? False witnesses. Right? These people couldn't just mind their own business. They had to drag innocent parties in. And due to it, they lost their life. I think that you could take this list. I didn't think about it until just now. But you could take this list and maybe study out about Christ, things that led to his death. I think we could draw a line from a lot of these to different people that were involved or situations, couldn't we? I didn't think about that till now. So a false witness who speaks lies, And then we have this one. One who sows discord among the brethren. Eric, I think, talked about this 2 weeks ago, talking about different men in 3 John, right? You had Diotrephes, who was a problem causer in the congregation. And so when you think about this, this was long before the church was established, when the book of Proverbs was written. We're talking about hundreds of years prior to the church, talking about in Israel, among the Jews, an abomination to God was one that does what? Divides the brethren, right? And we've got to ask, I think that all of us have tendencies, we're either dividers or uniters, aren't we? I think there's times at different times of situations where we're dividers or uniters. We ask the question, are we a divider or a uniter? Are we trying to bring the brethren together? Or are we trying to build our own groups like they did in 1 Corinthians 1? What are we trying to do? And we're not talking about ignoring truth, being unified on the truth of the gospel. What we're talking about is uniting the congregation, Christians together, the church together. Think about that. All right, any questions or comments? We'll move on to our next section. We've got 3 minutes, right? This section I titled Heart Away from God that we just looked at. And then you have verses 20 through 29. And we have the warning against the enticements of an immoral woman. And this is a theme that, if you've noticed, we have about 2 or 3 chapters where we start and then we go back over the same thing. And we're going to see this continuing. And so we see it's very repetitive from chapter 5. And then we're going to see it continues to be repetitive with more details as we keep studying ahead. And then we see that there's blessings for the righteous. And so we'll have time to read this real quick. Proverbs 6:20. We see here, my son, keep your father's command. Do not forsake the law of your mother. Bind them continually upon your heart. Tie them around your neck. When you roam, they will lead you. When you sleep, they will keep you. And when you awake, they will speak with you. For the commandment is a lamp, and the law a light. Reproofs of instruction are the way of life. To keep you from the evil woman, from the flattering tongue of a seductress. Do not lust after her beauty for your heart, nor let her allure you with her eyelids. For by means of a harlot a man is reduced to a crust of bread, and adulteress will prey upon his precious life. Can a man take fire to his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Can one walk with hot coals and his feet not be seared? So is he who goes into his neighbor's wife. Whoever touches her shall not be innocent. So there's a lot of things here. I almost broke this up into 2 sections. It's a lengthy reading. But as we look at this, and so as we see the instruction here, the beginning, we see the binding them around your neck again. And then we see something else. He says that they may do what? Verse 22, when you roam, they will do what? Guide you or lead you. You think about that. I know in 4-H we had to halter break. Anybody ever halter broke things? Tried to teach a dog to walk and not be walked, or as far as you be the one being walked. You think about that. You heard the phrase, does a dog wag the tail or does the tail wag the dog? That's what we're talking about here. Solomon's telling his son to tie these things around your neck, so that when you're bound to these things, they will guide you, right? How many of our youth in today's world are being led by righteous wisdom? How many even know what righteousness is? You know, they've got all these videos. They interview people and ask all the questions. I wonder what people would say if you asked them what righteousness was. Describe wisdom. How many people actually know? You think about that. All of us in this room are led by something, aren't we? We're led by our ideas, our opinions, our emotions, our desires. What's Solomon telling his son to be led by? When you think about desires, as you go through this chapter and a couple chapters to follow, you see that Solomon is very strongly urging his son not to be led by his desires, his enticements. How many of us are enticed by something? Yeah. When you're trying to halter break that lamb, and they see some feed or some grass they want, what do? They stop, they put their head down, and you got to drag them past it, right? Until what point? Until they become trained, right? Solomon's telling his son to be trained so that wisdom will draw you past all those distractions. Think about that. All right, we'll drop a peg there. Thank you for your time and your comments.